Well, it's certainly nice to be here, and it truly is an honor to be one of the president's speakers. So thanks to Dr. Walt Thompson, who is sitting here. And I also recognize in the audience many colleagues from around the world. And it's very nice to see you here as well. And all of your flights are delayed, so we can stay a little bit longer today. So today I'm talking about Seeking Gold, the evolution of nutrition strategies for creating a champion. And I thought I would start with the appropriate beginning, which is the ancient Olympic Games. And there actually are quite a few philosophical statements around that time, which I'm interested in no small part because I was born in Salonika, Greece. So I'm interested in Greek history a little bit. And, the main component of the Hippocratic philosophy was you have to have a healthy mind and a healthy body. And both for health promotion, physical activity was a very important component of getting healthy and staying healthy. And Hippocrates emphasized the importance of nutrition to improve performance of Olympic athletes. Now, how they went about it and what they ate was, I think you will find kind of fascinating because it surprised me. The advice to athletes that Hippocrates gave was, for improving sore muscles, get drunk once or twice. You may not improve your muscles, but it won't matter, at that point. For weight loss, eat more meat and protein, as you will end up craving less food. So clearly Hippocrates was familiar with the idea that high serum ketones buffered appetite a little bit. Pythagoras also had advice to athletes, another philosopher, and his advice was, for greater mental acuity and physical sharpness, eat less meat and more raw vegetables. So you can see, even in ancient times, there were strategic disagreements which continue to this day. We still have these disagreements. They're fascinating. The early writing in athletics during the classical period of Greece occurred hundreds of years after the initial Olympic Games. Information on Olympic athletes began to be recorded in real time in about 776 BC, when numbers began to be assigned to the games. So the date, 776 BC, was actually Olympiad 1. Even though there were Olympic Games before that, this is when the actual real-time recordings of what happened in the Olympic Games took place. So if you look at what people ate during that time, the ancient Greek staples were exactly what you would expect in a Mediterranean diet. Breads, vegetables, fruits, a little bit of fish, very little red meat. If you looked at ancient Greek athletes, they ate mainly breads, vegetables, fruits, and more high-protein foods. And if you looked at ancient Olympic athletes, the Olympians, the diet was based on cereals, cheese, fruits, vegetables, and wine diluted with water. What a terrible thing to do to wine. Later ancient Olympians, athletes came from upper socioeconomic status families who could afford the more expensive meats. And so it was mainly goat, in Greek the word is kachiki, fish, and legumes. The first recorded winner of the Olympics was about a 200-meter run. It was the distance of the stadium, called the stadion at the time. And he was a cook, Koriobos of Elis. And it's likely that he had more access to food chronic availability of food than other athletes, and that may well have contributed to his success. Charmis of Sparta was said to have trained mainly on dried figs. So the high fiber content of figs may have you imagining certain things that could have happened. But I was curious, and I looked up figs, and I thought, this is kind of interesting, because figs actually have a relatively high nitrate content for fruits. And of course, nitrate is converted to nitrite by oral bacteria, and then nitrite becomes a storage depot for nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator and can improve oxygen delivery to cells. So maybe they knew something back then. And it's possible that that conversion of nitrate to nitrite was more effective back then because they didn't use antibiotic mouthwashes, which would have compromised the oral bacteria at the time. So, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Protein was clearly an important aspect of the athlete diet. Meat was introduced in the middle of the 5th century by Dromius of Stymphalos, an ex-long-distance runner. Diogenes Laertius said that Eumenes of Samos consumed a diet recommended by his trainer, Pythagoras of Croton, a philosopher. And Milo of Croton, this is a very interesting, very specific description of what he ate. He won the wrestling event at 5 successive Olympic Games from 532 to 516 BC. I mean, that's a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, anybody who repeats a gold medal at the Olympic Games is phenomenal, but for someone to do it in 5 successive games, that's just amazing. And the description of his diet was amazing. According to Athenaeus and Pausanias, his diet was 20 pounds of meat, 20 pounds of bread, and 18 pints of wine a day. I want that diet. It's amazing, but I decided to do a little math on this, and that intake represents 75,000 calories per day, which, by comparison, there was a description of a United States Olympic athlete after the 2008 Games, where he was reported to have consumed a phenomenally high 12,000 calories per day. Michael Phelps, who was here at the ACSM meeting last year. And, that was considered to be just unbelievably, incredibly high level of caloric intake. So I think there may be a little bit of legend associated with some of the amounts, but I think it is interesting to look at the distribution of energy substrate. So we've got about a 50% carbohydrate and about a 50% protein intake represented between the bread. And if you add the fruit and the cereals and some of the other foods that they ate, so it was probably a little bit more carbohydrate than protein, but clearly much more protein from a ratio standpoint than we would probably recommend now for anyone. Dietary strategies followed by Olympians were interesting. They said, you have to avoid bread right before competition, which I think is interesting. Eat dried figs, thought to be good for building muscle and stamina. And as I said, maybe there was something to that. By the way, I have no shares in the fig industry, just want you to know. And drinking wine was very important. Clearly, times have changed. I mean, there are many Olympic athlete organizations from different countries that actually have supported athletes who are going to Olympic Games sign a form saying that they will consume 0 alcohol while attending the Games, right? So there's actually a prohibition to alcohol consumption. It could be a problem if you overeat and train. So there's a story which I thought was interesting, which I'll share with you. Geronos was a wrestler and he won at Olympic Games. And for a couple of days afterwards, he just ate wildly, he partied, he had fun, he was in a celebratory mode, and then he thought, whoops, I better get back into training, and he went to the gymnasium. The trainer was very upset that he broke his training, and they put him on a regular training schedule, and he died. The important note here is that recovery from partying is clearly as important as recovering from exercise. So it's important not to overdo it if the body isn't ready to do it. In the modern Olympic Games, this is pictured here is the Panathinaikos Stadium, which is the stadium built for the modern Olympic Games. This is, it was also called Kalimarmaro, which means beautiful marble. And this is the city of Athens behind it, which was built around the stadium. But at the 2004 Olympic Games, this was the finish for the marathon, where the runners went from Metathonas to the Panathinaikos Stadium, ran around a couple times in the stadium so the crowd could see them, and then they finished. This is also the last venue in Greece where they hand off the torch to the next host country. So this is where that happens, and that stadium is still there, built for the 1896 Olympic Games. I think it's important to consider in terms of food provision for athletes that there were no Olympic villages before 1932. They did not exist. National teams stayed at hotels, at schools, wherever they could find a place to stay. Athletes ate in hotel dining rooms, local restaurants, again, with families. Some of them were lucky enough to travel with personal chefs. Research on sports nutrition was virtually non-existent. And really, the research on sports nutrition didn't start until the early 1940s. We did have descriptions before that, but not research. In 1896, on the morning of the race, marathoners were fed olives, eggs, cheese, milk, and oranges, with some consuming retsina, which is it's a pine resinous wine common in Greece. And in 1896, oranges were made available during the race, but the runners were unable to access water. Imagine that now. It's just hard to imagine. There's a long history of documented alcohol consumption in the Olympic Games, in the modern Olympic Games also. Alcohol was used in a way that sports nutritionists would consider using ergogenic aids during training and before competition. In the 1908 Olympics, marathoners drank cognac as an ergogenic aid. Anything to kill the pain of the games, right? Also, in 1908, it was reported that a 100-kilometer walker consumed 22 glasses of beer and a half bottle of wine during the competition. They did have to put a lot of porta potties, apparently, along the route. This is the first winner of the modern Olympic Games, Spiridon Lewis, and it's very well documented that he stopped in the small town of Pikermi for his fabled glass of wine. But his family members say that it was actually not wine, but cognac. And after that, he was said to have found a certain level of endurance, quickly caught up to the leader, and he won. And you can see in this picture that he does have a somewhat dazed look on his eyes, there. But he was a winner. And in 1904, at the St. Louis Olympic Games, the Cuban runner, Felix Carvajal, developed stomach cramps after he snacked on green apples that he picked from an orchard along the course. He was hungry, and he was looking for food. American Thomas Hicks, who actually is pictured there, he was also struggling. The runner's assistants administered him an early 20th century ergogenic aid, a dose of strychnine, sulfate and egg whites, and a swig of brandy. Potentially lethal, but within the rules at the time, he did have to be assisted, after that ergogenic aid that he had. Now rejuvenated, he won, but he did collapse after he crossed the finish line. You'll be happy to know that strychnine is now on the World Anti-Doping Agency banned substance list. It is used for killing small mammals. But I think it's fascinating that we have that history of using that. At the 1908 Olympics, half of the 55 starters abandoned the race by the 20-mile mark in this 26.2-mile race. To keep them going, runners were given rice pudding, raisins, brandy, eau de cologne, and strychnine. I've never drunk eau de cologne, which I think is an interesting thing to consider. Maybe they splashed it on them just so that they would smell better. I don't know. But 2 miles to go, leader Charles Heffron of South Africa was given a glass of champagne by a fan along the course. A half mile later, he suffered terrible alcohol-induced GI symptoms. And we now know it's established policy that you don't give a carbonated beverage of any kind to an athlete who's physically active. It's like taking a can of soda and shaking it up, and you get a lot of expansion in the belly, and the GI symptoms are terrible. Likely inebriated and disoriented, Dorando Pietri took the lead, but at times was running the wrong way, which I think is interesting. And he actually had to be helped cross the finish line by assistants. And the poor guy, you can see him here. He has no idea where he is. He was later disqualified with the gold medal going to the United States marathoner Johnny Hayes, but obviously high level of consumption of the wrong stuff caused a problem. In more modern days, at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Games, it was much cooler than predicted. They expected the games to be really hot, but it wasn't really hot. The temperature was about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius. And the favorite to win the women's marathon was Gabriela Andersen-Schiess of Switzerland. And she was the favorite because in 2 big marathons the year before, she won them both with really good times. But look at her at the beginning of the race and her at the end of the race. She had collapsed a couple of times. She actually had to be helped up a couple of times. She insisted on completing the race. So what happens? Well, a very simple thing. You can never drink as much fluid as you're losing in sweat. The capacity for fluid absorption is less than the capacity for sweat loss. So blood volume invariably goes down over a 26.2-mile race, but there's a certain threshold where if you keep running at the expected pace, the heat generated from that pace may exceed your capacity to sweat enough to cool down, because most humans are maybe 30% efficient at converting burned fuel to mechanical force. That remaining 70% is heat creation. So the more energy you burn, the faster you go. The more energy you burn, the more heat you create, and the more heat you have to dissipate. So she just made what people think is just one mistake. And that one mistake is she missed the last hydration station. 5 kilometers before the end of the race. And so her blood volume probably reached a threshold where she was no longer able to satisfy the heat removal via sweat that she was creating via energy metabolism. Now, why would someone miss the last fluid station? Why would you do that? And sometimes the reality of the sport itself may keep you from doing the things that you want to do. So I'll just give you an example. This is a fluid station, a photo taken at a recent marathon in London. It's a battle in there. And so it's possible that Gabriella was thinking, well, it's cooler, I'm running well, I can just skip the station, because if I try to go into this station, who knows whose elbow I'm going to get into my ribs? You know, who knows what will happen to me when I try to proceed with the race. So I'm just going to skip this one because I'm doing well. Turned out that it was a mistake, but I think that's something that we increasingly have to think about, which is the reality of the sport itself. It's easy to say that a soccer player needs to consume X amount of fluid every 10 minutes in order to satisfy hydration requirements, but the game itself may not allow for that kind of practicality. And I think we could say that that's true for virtually every sport. The cross-country skier may fall and may feel that they just don't have the time to stop. They want to catch up, and then they put themselves in hydration problem. This is a picture of our 2 medal winners from the United States during the 2004 Olympic Games. And there are a number of reasons why I want to show you this slide, not the least of which is that I worked for many years with a very close colleague. We actually shared a laboratory at Georgia State University, Dr. David Martin, who was a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, and he was the head physiologist for the marathon team in 2004. So we started working with the top US runners about 3 years before the Olympic Games, and saw them through the Olympic Games. I was the nutritionist for the team. David passed away, I'm sorry to say, 2 months ago from a lung disorder that he had. And he will be missed because he said something to the athletes that I think we need to put our arms around. He said, the science works. As difficult as it may be to apply the science, let's use the science. And he captured the attention of the runners. He said this, and he said, look, US marathoners don't normally get medals, so let's find a different way. Do what you've always done, and you'll get what you've always gotten. And in the case of US marathon, it was typically not very good. And so David said, let's apply the science. We created criterion courses where we had runners running 2.5 kilometers out, 2.5 kilometers back. They'd grab something to drink off the trunk of a car, another 2.5 kilometers out, another 2, so that they could practice drinking at the same interval that they have an opportunity to drink at an Olympic Games, every 5 kilometers, right? And that adaptation ends up being an extremely important thing that many athletes don't do. They train differently than the competition realities allow, so they don't get the optimal adaptation to allow their body to adjust to what works really well. So thank you, David, and sorry you're not with us anymore. If you look at the evolution of food provision at the Summer Olympic Games, it's really gone through a pretty interesting evolution. This is from an article by Pelly, where you can go through it and see that it wasn't until 1960 that food was available on a 24-hour basis. Up until that time, athletes had to go on a 3-meal basis to eat their foods, which may have nothing at all to do with the way that they need to eat their foods. In 1972 Munich Olympics, they started thinking, oh, carbohydrates are important. Let's make sure that we have those available. So you can see that it wasn't until the 2008 Olympics in Beijing that we actually had an IOC external dietetic review of the menu so we could evaluate what went right, what went wrong, how could we make it better for upcoming games, what kind of guidance can we provide to the host city. And you know, if you look at some early studies in 1964, Jokel did an assessment of nutrient energy intakes at the 52 Olympic Games, and he found out something which we now take to be normal understanding of nutrition, which is failing to satisfy the increased energy requirements of the athletic endeavor results in poor performance outcomes. We know that. So after that came out, the importance of having chronic food availability for the athletes came to the forefront, and that was manifest in a lot of what we saw at the Olympic Villages. If you look at the London 2012 Olympic Games, a significant proportion of Olympic athletes reported following a specialized dietary regimen based on nutrient content, religion, and specific allergens to foods. That's something that had never really been thought about seriously. Reports of the use of the Olympic dining hall suggest that athletes are not always able to locate their foods because the dining halls are immense. So there are some practical issues that we have to resolve. The biggest dietary failure that was reported was the poor ability to quickly provide recovery foods and beverages to athletes who are either in competition or in training. And for many athletes at Olympic Games, they have a sequence of athletic endeavors that they have to follow. So if you're running in the 100-meter sprint, you may have to run 3 100-meter sprints in order to get to the finals. So the ability to recover well ends up being a very important factor in success. So the recovery issue is increasingly coming to the forefront. So why do athletes select the foods that they do select? Well, it turns out that a higher proportion of female athletes rated smell and food familiarity as more important than males did. The nutrition composition of foods was rated as very important by the greatest proportion of athletes from weight category sports and endurance sports respectively, but not very important by other athletes, suggesting, even though they are very important for all athletes, that we have some education to do with these athletes. Prior to the work of Krogh and Lindhart in 1920, which supported an important role of carbohydrate as a fuel for exercise, protein was considered the predominant fuel sought by most athletes. It's kind of interesting, but you know, back then, tea and coffee was not popular. Now it's incredibly popular because caffeine has come to the forefront as an important potential ergogenic aid if it's used correctly. And alcohol was consumed by virtually all European athletes. I like European athletes. If you look at the current nutrition goals, goal 1, providing sufficient fuel of the right kind, in the right amount, and the right time to train and perform at the elite level is probably goal number 1. It's not just eating enough food. It's not just getting enough calories, but providing the right calories at the right time and the right amount is complex. It requires analysis for each athlete, each athletic endeavor, and it's not easy, but that's the best way to go. We want nutrition intake to help athletes achieve optimum gains from the training program. So it's not just doing it right at competition, but doing it right while they train. We want to make sure that recovery ends up being satisfied so that they can have a good workout on the following day. We want to make sure that they're eating in a way that can achieve an ideal body mass and physique. We want to make sure that injury is reduced, overtraining doesn't occur, and fatigue and illness are also reduced. We want them confident in being well prepared to face competition, and the best way to do that is to have them practice during practice what they're doing in competition, to mimic the same pattern of intake and exercise. Consistency in achieving high-level competition performances, so we'd like to see people do as well all the time, and enjoyment of food and social eating occasions at home and during practice. Sometimes I think we get too strident about nutrition. The rule that's thrown around, which works really well, I call the 90-10 rule. That is, do it right 90% of the time, and 10% of the time, enjoy yourself, have fun. If you look at the current American College of Sports Medicine position on nutrition and athletic performance, I think they've done a wonderful job of organizing what needs to happen with athletes and nutrition. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't seen this, to get a copy. It's open access, this particular position paper. Theme 1 is preparation, and it involves making sure that energy requirements, balance, and availability are appropriate so that the athletes can do what they need to do without risk of disease, injury, or other body composition associated problems. Theme 2, performance nutrition, making sure that pre, during, and post-event eating is appropriate and that hydration guidelines are followed. I still see a lot of athletes drinking water. And maybe water is appropriate under some circumstances, but not in a lot of the circumstances that I see them consuming water. And if you ask them why, they say, well, if I drink something that has sugar in it, it'll make me fat. Seriously. We have to break through those myths because it's keeping athletes from achieving at their very best. And, we can help achieve the desired muscle glycogen stores, and, we have to look at protein guidelines. Oh my God, do athletes like protein? I was working with the Atlanta Falcons for 5 years, and their average protein consumption was between 3 and 5 grams per kilogram of mass. Huge amounts of protein. But there are clearly studies where maximal protein utilization, when you get above 1.6 or 1.7, I would say probably, maximum protein utilization, if energy requirements are met, that's it. That's all a person can adequately use in protein. And what happens is if they have protein, too much of it, then they don't have other things that they need. And other foods provide another set of nutrients, macro and micronutrients, that are necessary for the athletic endeavor. And ergogenic aids are a big deal, but using them appropriately and finding the right ones, which very often are sport specific, is not easy. And then, of course, special populations and environments. How do you exercise in the heat, cold, humidity, athlete? Or do you have vegetarian athletes? There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian athlete. You don't have to get a vegetarian athlete to eat meat, but it requires attention to make sure that they get what they need to get to optimize performance. And then, of course, the roles and responsibilities of the sports dietitian to get the right things to happen at the right time, I think very important. A very important key to success in all of this is making sure that the sports dietitian is an integral part of the sports medicine team. And I see here a colleague of mine, Dr., should I mention your name? Who I've worked with on many, Mark Hutchinson from Chicago. We worked on many teams together, but a physician, orthopedic surgeon, he made sure that the exercise physiologist, the nutritionist, the sports psychologist, everybody had an integral part of what to say about athlete function. And it worked very nicely. If these different disciplines are working independently, I think we lose a lot of benefit. So if you look at what you have to do with an athlete, sometimes you have to have blood tests. Sometimes you have to have assessments of allergies. We know that we have to make sure that we must reduce the chance for relative energy deficiency or within-day energy balance issues in athletes. We have to make sure that exercise is appropriate for an athlete, either to get them better or to reduce injury risk. If it's a female athlete, we have to make sure that the female athlete triad is considered as a possible problem for increasing stress fracture risk. There are many issues. None of this can happen unless the sports medicine team works cooperatively. And there was just a paper published just a short time ago demonstrating clearly that multifactorial approaches involving training, recovery, diet, psychology, skills, enhance performance outcomes in both individual and team sports. There's no better place than the American College of Sports Medicine to have an integral approach to what we can do with athletes. This is the place. We all have our independent organizing groups. I'm a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, but they're interested in nutrition and dietetics. The American College of Sports Medicine includes all of these disciplines. We have a wonderful opportunity to make sure that this can happen well. If you look at common nutrition problems with our Olympians, poor knowledge of foods and poor cooking skills, poor outdated knowledge of sports nutrition, lack of access to dietitians. It's interesting. I go to an international competition or I go to a national competition, and it's the food purveyor that decides what athletes will eat. Whoever the sponsor is of that competition determines what's available. That's not right. We need to make sure that we get control of this. Inadequate finances, busy lifestyle leading to an inadequate time to obtain or consume the appropriate foods. Poor making weight strategies. A lot of athletes who are in sports where weight categories are important. The things that they have to do in order to achieve the appropriate weight potentially cause an enormous number of both short-term and long-term problems with them that may dramatically increase injury risk. Poor availability of good food. Frequent travel. Indiscriminate use of large amounts of supplements or failure to use evidence-based supplements in a way that they should be used because people don't understand that they're dealing with chemicals. Sport-specific limitations to doing it right, as I showed you that slide. There's a lovely article by Close et al., published in 2016, which categorizes ergogenic aids as strong evidence, moderate evidence, or no evidence or banned. But the problem that happens with athletes is they have this belief that if a little bit is good for you, more must be better, right? And we have to tell them that more than enough is not better than enough, somehow. As my mother used to say, enough is enough. Because if you get too much, you have the wrong things happening for a lot of these ergogenic aids. I would also encourage you to look at an absolutely superb paper that has just come out. It's open access. It's the IOC consensus on dietary supplements, which include a lot of the ergogenic aids and supplements that athletes are taking, and they have a wonderful evaluation of all of them. We've been waiting for this paper for a long time. So thanks to Ron Mon and Louise Burke and others who took leadership and gave us this wonderful resource. And there are new technologies which are coming out. So we have to think about how much are they, how do they work, are they valid, can we use them just in the field, can we use them just in the lab, can we use them just in a clinic, how invasive are they, how useful is the information, that they provide. So here's an example of a digital imaging dietary intake that you can do, which is being experimented with. And it turns out that this may well improve the accuracy of the food intake record, because we have a lot of problems. I mean, most people don't realize that the food memory curve after 24 hours is 50% of the amount actually consumed, right? Both in terms of qualitative and quantitative food memory. 50%, that is, after a 24-hour period, you forgot what you had yesterday and how much you ate yesterday, right? So we need some method to try to make sure that we can improve the accuracy of that. There's also some technology which can estimate energy intake by looking at swallowing and can look at chewing, which is kind of interesting, I think. And there's technology many technologies, as we saw here at the meeting, for predicting energy expended. Basically, the technology has said multiple sensors are better than single set sensors. So companies are coming out with those. And then there are technologies that combine them. So you look at chewing and swallowing at the same time that you look at energy expenditure to kind of combine that information so you get real-time energy balance all the time. And you say, well, why do you need real-time energy balance? Well, here are two examples of why you need it. These papers just published where they looked at real-time energy balance, and they found that athletes who spend a lot of time in an energy balance deficit, even if at the end of the day they eat everything that they need to eat, both qualitatively and quantitatively, have problems. So in female athletes, which was the Fahrenholtz article, those who had big energy balance deficits had significantly higher cortisols and significantly lower estrogen, even when 24-hour energy balance was met. And in the Torstveit article, male athletes had significantly higher cortisol and significantly lower testosterone to cortisol ratio, even when 24-hour energy balance was met. These are amazing findings, but the difficulty in getting that information without using high technology, I mean, you can do it in a lab and you can do it in a limited number of settings, but if you want to get it on competitive athletes, then I think we have to find ways to use some of this new technology so that we can get estimates of real time, not just energy expenditure, not just energy intake, but real time, both getting the information on both of those. And then we have sweat patches that can give you all kinds of information that will help you understand what the person needs or is losing. And if you look at the Tokyo 2020 games, I mean, Tokyo is hot. And, Japan's heat and humidity is going to be brutal. So getting information on how an individual athlete responds to that hot and humid environment, I think will be extremely useful. It's not really possible unless we start incorporating some of these new technologies. Body composition, sometimes you need very expensive, very heavy equipment. Well, one of my former graduate students, now a professor at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, Olivia Affuso, has developed a photographic technique which uses algorithms on body shape. Once you have height and weight, you take the photograph and it will calculate for you. The standard error of estimation is about 3%. Amazing. So pretty good. So you can get a good delta score for how the person has changed, and you don't need a lot of bulky equipment to do it, and they don't have to come to the lab in order to get the information. I will say that using high technology may result in a less personal interaction with an inferior understanding of issues leading to poor performance. So we have to be cautious of that. And I also want to help you understand how important it is to get multiple readings on the same athlete. So I'm just using this as an example. So let's say that you do a body composition assessment on an athlete and body fat percent is too high. The initial reaction for that will be to say, well, let's intervene. Let's see if we can find a way to get you to exercise and to get you to eat to lower your body fat percent just a little bit. But what if the month earlier, this same athlete had an even higher body fat percent. And a month before that, the same athlete had an even higher body fat percent. Why in the world would we intervene in what is already a successful strategy? But if you just take one measure, you would never know. And you could say the same thing on the other side, right? So you measure an athlete, they look like they're a little bit leaner than the average for the team. You say, great, okay, that's good. You're a lean and mean machine. But what if a month earlier they were even leaner? And a month before that, they were even leaner. So you're not intervening when you should in one case, and you are intervening when you shouldn't in another case. And I think we just have to make sure we really know our athletes very well. And we need studies on up-and-coming young athletes who are on an Olympic trajectory. A lot of athletes, particularly endurance athletes, are getting older. The male athlete with the most medals in a biathlon is 44 years old. Many cyclists are in their 30s and 40s. The female with the most medals in cross-country skiing is 38 years old, and she had 2 babies prior to recent Olympic Games. Some elite athletes are pregnant at the same time they prepare for Olympic competition, and fewer than 1/3 receive appropriate nutrition guidance. By the way, this was really important information from a good colleague, Yuden Songat Borgen, who happens to be right here. She's available for questions afterwards. So just to summarize, the old was sport-associated tradition-based eating. Now we have sport-associated science-based eating. We had random food availability. Now we have chronic food beverage availability. We had a focus on weight and nutritional strategies for getting to ideal weight. But now the focus is on weight constituents. What constitutes weight? With nutrition strategies for optimizing body composition. Meeting daily nutrient requirements has been changed to satisfying nutrient requirements to optimize cellular utilization. We used to meet energy and nutrient requirements on a daily basis, but now we have to dynamically match energy expenditure and intake to avoid relative energy deficiency and large energy balance deficits. There used to be a focus just on the pre-game meal. Now there's a focus on total eating behavior, including pre-game, during exercise, and recovery nutrition. There's an incorporation of strange ergogenic aids, as I showed you before, unless some of you regularly are taking strychnine. And now there's scientific use of non-banned ergogenic aids that are sport-specific. There was no attention to special dietary needs, and now there's a lot of attention on special dietary needs. And I think it's very important when you look at all of this that we start making the sports dietitian an integral part of the sports medicine team, because recent studies have shown when you do that, really good things happen. I want to thank my close colleagues who provided input on this presentation. Dr. Francisco Arroyo from Mexico, Mariah Bellissimo, a PhD candidate, former graduate student of mine, Mark Hutchinson, who's sitting here, AJ Nibel, who's the strength and conditioning coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Yuden Songat Borgen, who's here, Monica Torstvit, and Randy Wilbur of the United States Olympic Committee. Thank you very much.
I just want to thank Dr. Bernardo for an insightful, wonderful ending to this meeting, and we have a small gift for him. And then I'd like to call up Walt Thompson to end this session.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Dan. One of the privileges of being the ACSM president is you do get to select the 4 presidential lectures, and we've had 4 great ones. Dan, I can also relate to your turn-of-the-century Olympians, because I too was a college athlete and a pretty good one. but I was also a member of a fraternity. Thank you. Probably too much information for everybody.
Right.
Thank you for attending the ACSM 65th Annual Meeting, 9th World Congress on Exercise as Medicine, and the World Congress on the Basic Science of Muscle Hypertrophy and Atrophy. We hope that you found the conference to be both rewarding and stimulating. Look for an email message from the ACSM office with a link to the meeting evaluation. The program committee is very interested in your comments for future program planning. We invite you to the next year, to 2019 annual meeting, 10th World Congress on Exercise as Medicine, and the World Congress on the Basic Science of Exercise, Circadian Rhythms, and Sleep, May 28th to June 1st in Orlando. Please consider submitting a proposal for the 2019 annual meeting or EIM World Congress by visiting the ACSM website. Proposals are due Wednesday, June the 20th. I hope all of you have a safe travel home, and thank you for being here.